Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Well, good afternoon, Tom. We're here for another short session of Tom Campbell Answers Your Questions. Thanks for being here today. Our first question comes from Stephen L. He asks, how does the entropy of the LCS become reduced by Tom revealing its secrets to the world with his MBT work? For example, the LCS obviously doesn't want everyone to know that we're in a virtual reality of information, but instead wants us to feel and experience the physical and mental consequences of our free will decisions in PMR to have the most impact on our consciousness. How would you comment on that?
Well, the LCS doesn't really want to keep the facts of consciousness secret. That's not true. It does, with the psi uncertainty principle, it does like to keep some things kind of low key. But the way it does that is that the people who are ready to learn, then the system wants them to learn. I mean, learning is growing up. That's what we're talking about. Learning is evolving. And the bigger picture you have, then the easier it is to understand what's going on and your place in it. So the system wants us to understand. It's not trying to keep it a secret from us. So those people who would abuse it, the system works in a way that they have to come to the point where they're ready for it, where they're ready to understand it, ready to get a bigger picture before they get exposed to it. Well, that works just fine, because when they're not ready, it's almost impossible to expose it to them. Even if you stick it right in their face, they'll deny it, turn away from it. You say, here, read this book. It's my big toe. And they'd look at it and it would say something about out of body on the first chapter and they'd throw it away. You see, so even if you push it at them, they won't look at it. So it would prevent somebody from levitating in front of all the news media, because then that would get people's intellects connected to how can I use that? How can I abuse that? How can I make money on that? And suddenly, we don't want that. It's not about growing up. But other than things like that, it doesn't mind if you levitate. You see, so individuals are perfectly welcome to have paranormal or experiences or get big pictures. They're not only welcome, they're encouraged to get this information. We just don't want to push it at people who aren't ready for it. So when they are ready, it'll connect. They'll have an experience. Something in their life will bump them out of their rut of being a believer in materialism. And then they'll start becoming seekers. They'll start looking on the internet. Gee, did anybody else have this amazing thing happen to them? And then they need to find answers there. You see, now they're ready. So that's the way it works. So it's not that the system wants to keep all that a secret and that somehow I'm blabbing the LCS a secret. I'm helping the LCS disseminate this information to people who can use it to grow up. And believe me, those who can't use it to grow up, those who aren't ready for that, it won't mean anything to them. It'll go in one ear and out the other, or they'll think it's a bunch of nonsense. So, what do they say? That the biggest secrets are right in front of your nose. It's just you can't see them because you're not able to yet. There's a lot of things like that.
Well, I think you have to be brave to take on your book, because not only is it a large book, it is unifying philosophy, physics, and metaphysics. Right there, you'd have to be aware of what you're getting into. Also, the book requires that you do your own work, which is another thing. People often want an easy answer. My Big Toe, written by a nuclear physicist in the language of contemporary Western culture, unifies science and philosophy, physics and metaphysics, mind and matter, purpose and meaning, the normal and the paranormal, the entirety of human experience, mind, body, and spirit, including both our objective and subjective worlds. It's brought together under one seamless scientific understanding. Now, that's very compelling for a lot of people who are seeking that, who have
Right.
been looking for a long time.
And for other people who are trapped in their beliefs, particularly beliefs of materialism, that's enough. That's as far as they'd get, because when they saw the word paranormal, they'd toss the book back. You know, they wouldn't have any interest in it at all, because they know it was all just a bunch of lies and misunderstandings and weak minds that are latching onto things that make them feel better, that sort of thing. They
Well,
would dismiss it.
Yeah, the other thing that they would not quite grasp is that 850 plus page book is based on your experience. It's not on a theory or something you've conjured up or dreamt of. You've written this book based on repeated experiments within consciousness and physics. So that's the remarkable thing about that.
Yeah. So anyway, no, it's not a problem. System and I get along just fine. I have a very good working relationship with the LCS, and I'm here as much on its behalf as for any other reason. So it's not letting the cat out of the bag, because this is a cat that if you're not ready to, understand this cat, then you won't even see it. You won't notice it. You'll walk away from it.
That's a good point. Thanks, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
His second question, Tom constantly uses the term my truth, his truth, or her truth when there's no such thing as a possessive truth. Possessive truths are contradiction of the meaning of the term truth. Truth is the rule set, so he says, or universal facts. You can have your own beliefs, but not your own facts. That is the whole point of the term truth, universal fact. When Tom says my truth, her truth, his truth, as he often does, he inadvertently conflates truth with personal beliefs, personal feelings, and personal experiences, compromising a hugely important and defining term of the rule set. Again, truth is universally accepted facts of our LCS and PMR, as distinguished from my feelings, personal experience, my truth. We can't all have our own truths, as it's a contradiction of the term. Susie's truth, 2 + 2 = 7. John's truth, 2 + 2 = 11. This dangerously provides an easy out for those who are too lazy or complacent to continue to seek and find enlightenment of the truth. Can you comment on that?
Sure. This is basically a problem of, what do you call it, semantics. You know, this is just a word in its definition. And he is looking at the word truth and thinking only absolute truth, universal truth. And in his mind, there is no other truth other than absolute truth. But now, in all language, and maybe even particularly in English being a language that tends to require the reader to gather information about how to interpret a word based on context. English does that. I've seen people translate my books, and one page of my book will be a page and a half in Spanish, and also more in German, and so on. It's because they tend to be a lot more specific in their details, these other languages. English is one that's not all that specific. We really depend, English speakers depend on figuring out what the words mean based on the context of what they're reading. So the idea that there is only one definition and this is the one, and anybody that uses it any differently is wrong. That is just not the case. It's not like that. Words have multiple meanings, and depending on how they're used, the context will decide whether it's this meaning or that meaning. It's just the nature of language to not be precise. Matter of fact, another good example of the lack of precision in normal language is that if you've ever presented a lawyer with a document that you'd like the lawyer to make a legal document for you, you'll notice that it takes just a paragraph or two for you to describe what it is you want. But it'll take a lawyer 5 pages to put that in legalese such that every possible way of misinterpreting it is eliminated. That's why legal documents are so long. It's not the same as normal speech. In normal speech, words can be interpreted many different ways. If you take a normal paragraph that somebody writes or that somebody speaks, most people can read it and understand what it means. But if you want that to be legal and stand up in court, which means that there's no possible way that somebody could misunderstand it, you're going to have to change that paragraph into 3 or 4 pages. Well, people can't speak that way. I mean, if you've ever picked up a legal document, about halfway through, your eyes roll up in your head and all the whereases and therefores and so on. And it's just, that's enough, and you quit and say, what does this thing mean? And he tells you and you sign it, because it's just too much trouble to read that much detail. That's the language. Well, that tells us that our normal everyday language is not precise. And to think that it needs to be precise is, well, it's okay, but it's not going to work. It's not going to be that way. Now, so why do I use the word truth in multiple ways? Now, if I'm talking about absolute truth, which I do talk about in my book, there is absolute truth. But all of the things that belong in the basket of absolute truth are the things that consciousness brings us. They're the attributes of consciousness. Like we can say, what about the difference between good and bad or good and evil? Now many people would say, well, that's relative. What's good in one place is evil in another. So that's really relative. Well, some parts of it can. Culture's relative. Some things that are good in one culture, like not burping at the table, might be really good in another culture, where a good belch means you really enjoyed the meal. So yes, there are things like that. But the idea that if what you do lowers entropy for yourself and for the system in the long term, then that's a good thing. If what you do, or the choices you make, I should say, raises entropy for yourself and the system in the long term, that's bad. So now we have a definition of good and bad that is universal. It applies everywhere, every culture, every situation, you see? So that's a universal truth. But all of these universal truths are basically truths generated out of the nature of consciousness. Okay, now, truth is used many ways. And when I use her truth, my truth, their truth, that is a perfectly good way to use the word truth. It's not the same as absolute truth. Obviously, absolute is everybody's truth all the time. But I use it that way because it's true that all of us live in our own reality. You see, reality is what we interpret the data stream to be. That's our reality. So we're pieces of consciousness getting a data stream, and we interpret that data stream. And if we interpret it this way, then this way is our reality. If we interpret it that way, then that way is our reality. Our reality is individual because it depends on our interpretation. What affects our interpretation? Well, the biggest thing that affects it is our fear. The more fearful you are, the more ego you have, the more beliefs you have, then the stranger your interpretation is going to be. It's going to be very different from other people. Now, if you live in a society that most people have the same fears, then you're going to interpret reality to be pretty similar. That takes us to 5 people all standing on a street corner waiting for a bus, and an accident takes place right at that street corner, and all 5 accident reports will be different. Everybody will see it differently. They won't all tell you the same thing. And it'll have to do with their fears, their attitudes, things they believe, their egos. Everybody will see it differently, and that's their truth. As far as they're concerned, what they see, how they interpret it, is what happened and why it happened. So it's important to be able to speak about this using the word my truth. This is my truth, because it is very germane to each of us living in our own reality. We each see things in our own way. Now, talk about beliefs. Everybody who has a belief thinks that that belief is a fact. That's just the nature of belief. If you believe that the moon is made out of green cheese, then to you, if you truly believe that, it's a fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. So everybody's belief appears to be a fact to those people, appears to be the truth to those people. But that doesn't make it true. It's just true for that individual. Well, what is true? You can't ask an individual what's true, in the sense that, is it true that the moon is made of green cheese? And you can say, well, absolutely not. That's not true. Well, then we'll look at that and say, all right, how do we know that? Well, we sent a satellite around the moon. We've sent a robot there that's dug up some of the dirt. So we have some evidence about that, some scientific facts out of measurement. We've brought some of that soil and some of those rocks back. And indeed, we can look at them and find that there's no green cheese there at all. Okay, now that then is a scientific fact. Okay, we called it a fact because there's been an experiment to investigate that fact. It's not just somebody's opinion, but a well-done experiment to verify it. All right, now to that person that believes that never happened and the moon really is made of green cheese, then it's not a fact at all. They don't accept that fact. In their mind, that's not true. So see, what's true and what's not true is indeed individual, just like reality is indeed individual. We all don't live in the same reality. So it's important to state it that way so that people realize that there's many things in their minds, many things that they think are true, many things that they think are facts that aren't. That's why you always have to be skeptical. You've heard me say many times, you have to be open-minded, but skeptical. And you mostly have to be skeptical of yourself, because we humans are so good at convincing ourselves that what we want to believe is true, whether it is or not. And we're also very good at denying things and looking the other way when contrary evidence comes by. These are things that humans are just very, very good at. Okay, so I would suggest to this person, and don't kind of get too wound up on the fact that I was talking about one thing and you were talking about another. You were talking just about universal truth. But that's not the only useful way to use the word truth in language. I think most people would read the context of what I wrote, particularly when I talk about we all live in our in individual realities, and they would see exactly what I meant. They wouldn't mistake what my message was and what I was talking about. So I tell people not to believe MBT, not to believe what they read in my book, because to believe it won't help them. To disbelieve it won't help them. So belief is the problem. But if you have a belief then that modifies your reality, changes your truth. Doesn't change absolute truth. Absolute truth is absolute. You raise entropy, that's not a good thing. You lower it, it is a good thing. You know, if you evolve your consciousness in the positive direction, that's a good thing. You de-evolve, you know, that's not a good thing. These things are universal and apply to everybody all the time. So that's what I was saying. And I think almost all the readers reading it understood what I was getting at and what I was saying. I don't think they were confused by that. Now, indeed, some people will say, oh, it's just a virtual reality. So since it's a virtual reality, nothing really matters because virtual realities aren't real. So we can just do anything. We can do anything we want. There's nothing to inhibit our bad behavior because it doesn't really matter anyway, because it's just a virtual reality. Well, they're missing the point completely if you think that. And yes, some people will think that way. Some people will be confused by the things I say and won't understand it very well, but that can't be helped, you know, otherwise you just never write a book because you can guarantee that there's going to be a certain percentage of your readers that will misunderstand it. But that's part of life. You know, you have to write it as clearly and concisely as you can. And in this case, I meant exactly what I said. His truth, her truth, my truth, your truth, that exists. And it's an important concept to understand my model, because it has to do with consciousness and how consciousness works. That we create our reality partially by our own interpretation of it. So
But you also
anyway,
say what is important is that you make good choices. And when you allow your truth, so to speak, to be based on a belief, an ego, a fear, I want things to be this way, then that's not the kind of thing you're talking about. You're talking about the big truth that says that this reality is about caring about others. That is the universal truth.
sure. Well, people can misunderstand things, and one of the problems, one of the well, it's not really a misunderstanding, but one of the issues that creates problems for many people is that they think their truth is the universal truth. They think their personal truth is the one that is applies to everyone. Okay, well, in my book, I try to discourage that opinion. You know, that an individual's truth is absolute truth. But many people feel that way. They think their truth is the truth, and it isn't. So talking about it in terms of individual perspective is a good thing. It helps people understand that what they believe to be true isn't necessarily true for others, and that you should give those others respect. You should not necessarily call everybody who disagrees with you stupid. You know, that's an arrogant thing. Arrogant in that, you know, my ideas are the right ideas, and if you don't share my ideas, then you're stupid. That's arrogance. And by describing it the way I do, it makes that clear that that's arrogance. So I don't really disagree with you that that's problematic the way I've written that. I think I said it exactly the way I meant it. I think most people will read it the way I intended it. And I do elsewhere talk about things that are universal. You know, but again, the universal things have to do with consciousness. They don't have to do with what Susie and Bill did on their vacation. You know, it's not those sorts of things.
I think people have to understand that you mostly come from the bigger picture, the big viewpoint that is consciousness and how consciousness works and what works for everyone. We hold these truths to be self-evident, you know, comes to mind.
Okay.
Anyway,
We've probably beaten this to
we
death.
probably
So.
did. So I hope that helps a little. Thank you, Tom.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.